Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel here, back again today. Feeling a little bit sick today, but took the morning off, did a little rest, but we still got the obligation to learn, and so we're here. So today we have slavery in Islam, Dr. Shabir Ali. Slavery in Islam. This is a great topic, a very interesting topic. You'll get a lot of disbelievers, using this as some kind of leverage that Islam is bad because in the Quran, slaves are mentioned. Slaves are allowed to Muslims in some circumstances. So this is what we're going to get into. Hopefully today, I've never seen this video. I want to know what Shabir Ali says here today about what those circumstances are. Under what circumstances are Muslims actually allowed to have a slave and it be considered halal? So let's hope he explains this, inshallah, and let's get into it.
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
In our last episode, we spoke about slavery in world religions. Now I want to focus on slavery in Islam. So, Dr. Shabir, can you tell me, what does the Quran say about slavery?
Yeah, it's important that we are starting there, Sophia, because as our viewers will know by now, the Muslims and non-Muslims will know that the Quran is the very basis of Islamic law. This, for Muslims, is the word of God. And so
that's why I like Shabir Ali. He always hits the basics, keeps it basic.
It's important for us to start there and see what it says. So from what we know of the Quran, very little is mentioned about slaves. Though, of course, when Muslims read that, even today, like your right-hand possession, Muslims find it troubling, because we don't have this kind of right-hand possession today, which is a terminology that is used in the Quran. It means something like what you rightfully possess, but not only what, it's the persons that you rightfully possess. And this seems like out of place today. But nonetheless, we should understand the Quran in its historical context to see what was being spoken about, what was the situation in life, and how the Quran is dealing with that situation on the ground. So as we've established in the previous episode, the situation on the ground across the world's religions, across territories, was that slavery was a reality. So how was the Quran dealing with that? The Quran is actually encouraging Muslims again and again to free the slaves, and this is most of the mention about slavery in the Quran is about freeing the slaves. For example, in the 90th chapter of the Quran, they're asking you about the ascent, what's going to cause you to ascend. Everybody wants to go to heaven, right? So what's going to cause this ascent? It's fakku raqaba. That's the first thing that's mentioned, is freeing the slaves. And the Quran gives us ways of atoning for our sins, and for sins one after another, the Quran says, free a slave. So by freeing a slave, you would be atoning for your sins. And we all make mistakes. We all want the forgiveness of God. The Quran institutes charity as one of what Muslims would regard as the 5 pillars of Islam, giving charity. It is often called zakat by Muslims. And the 9th chapter of the Quran, the 60th verse, itemizes the various ways in which this zakat or charity can be spent. And one of the ways is for freeing a slave, which means that you might buy a slave off of a master and then set the slave free as an act of goodwill and of charity. So it
seems like the Quran is recognizing that there's something happening here, like there's some sort of oppression that is taking place, and the Quran is trying to alleviate it in some way.
Yes.
Not abolishing it, but alleviating
it, yes. And I'm not aware that the Quran in any verse says that slaves have to obey their human masters. All humans are required to obey God. Whereas we have seen in some other scriptures that there is an exhortation to the slave, obey your master, as if...
ultimately it wouldn't make sense to me for slavery very easily to fit into Islam, because like Shabir Ali just mentioned, Islam ultimately means submission to God. So if submitting to your slave master, to your master as a slave, gets in the way of your submission to God, then it would actually be your duty to disobey your owner and obey God instead.
There is, like as if this relationship is recognized by God as a valid way of, like there's a kind of a hierarchy, God on top, the human masters, and then the human slaves below. But from the Quranic point of view, all of us are servants of God, and in this way,
we're all equal in the sight of
God. And in fact, a person who is a slave, this is recognized in other religions as well. The person who is a slave legally in this world, well, now illegal, but when it was legal, even then, the slave could be closer to God spiritually than his or her master.
Does the Quran say something like this?
Well, this is recognized widely in the Quran, not specifically necessarily with reference to slaves in particular, but the Quran says, "Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum." The most honorable among you, all human beings, are those who are more aware of their duty to God. And of course, that could be even a slave.
So why do you think that the Quran didn't take that next step and get rid of slavery?
It may be due to the circumstances.
That was a great question. Hard hitter. Let's see what he says.
At the time. There's an interesting verse in the Quran in the 24th chapter that may shed some light on this. It says that if a slave were to seek to have a contract with you for his or her release, then you should write that contract for him if you see any good in him. Now, the question is, what does the Quran say if you see any good in him? It may be that somebody may frivolously say, okay, let's get down and write a contract, but he's not capable of getting out of his situation of slavery. We know in modern times of what is called a welfare trap, where a person may be so accustomed to a certain way of life and a way of earning income or receiving income that one does not one does not have the wherewithal to get out of this situation. Of course, we should do everything as a society to help people out of that situation. But at that time, maybe slavery was such a reality that there are some people who just simply will not get out of this. But there was a way out. So if some slave person had the ability, as people now work in a second job, if they could, in addition to serving their master, they could do work on the side, earn some income, and based on that income, they could actually buy themselves off the master to set themselves free.
Was that something that happened?
This happened, and this is what the Quran is speaking about now. If the slave wants to enter into a contract with the master for this sort of freedom, it's called a mukataba in Arabic. They write an agreement, and the slave is going to pay so much to the master to free himself. So then the Quran says, if you see any good in them, then you should write this contract for them. And it is mentioned that the second caliph of Islam, Omar, he made it mandatory. He said, even though the Quran put it as a kind of condition, if you see any good in him, that condition doesn't really apply. In his present context, he saw that it's necessary to write the contract just for the fact that the slave is requesting this. And so this is one way in which the slave would have become free. And we know in Islamic history that there were circumstances in which slaves rose to great positions of power and prominence.
The Mamluks, for example.
The Mamluks, for example, yes. They were Circassian persons who were often castrated and sold into slavery. They were bought into Muslim lands, and then in Muslim lands, they rose to positions of power until they actually became the ruling class. And so Mamluk actually literally means one who is possessed, one who is owned. And the Mamluks then, and the Mamluk Empire, which came to bear that name, is owed to this history for the fact that those who now became the rulers were once slaves.
I believe it wasn't only in that period, but I believe in the Abbasid period and the Ottoman period, we see that trend as well. So it seems like slaves didn't necessarily have the lowest position on the rung. No, they had power.
They had power and influence. In fact, some of the early teachers and transmitters of Islamic tradition were, in fact, once slaves. But they had either as slaves, they learned the tradition from their masters, and then they later on became teachers, or later on they were freed, and they still kept their allegiances to their previous masters, but they nonetheless became very important and influential teachers. I think if there's any last thing we need to say, we need to acknowledge that we have painted a kind of a rosy picture, and it's not all of that rosy. There have been difficulties, and slavery is an evil that we recognize in modern times. Ancient societies grapple with it in their own way.
So Shabir Ali here, he just said that it's an evil that we recognize in modern times, but yet he hasn't given any Quranic basis for that. He never said that there's anything in the Quran that says that slavery is haram or so this is interesting, the angle that Shabir has taken.
We have to grapple with it in our own way, in our own time. This calls for a lot of reinterpretation of the Islamic tradition, and we must be brave enough to do that.
So,
wow, what did he just say? Reinterpretation of the Islamic tradition? Hey, that's not. Those are powerful words, big words, strong words. Well, let's just finish the video here. He's got a few more minutes left, and then I'll give my
Dr.
thoughts.
Shabir, what were some of the rules involved with, I understand that Islam places some limitations on having slaves. So can you tell me a little bit about what those limitations were?
This girl's asking good questions.
In the first place, you could not go raid a community and steal their people and make them slaves. In fact, it is mentioned that the Prophet, peace be upon him, specifically said that he will be an opponent of those people on the Day of Judgment who go raid a community and steal their people.
Okay. I like it.
To sell them into slavery. So what remained for Muslims was the one avenue of acquiring slaves through war. And again, one would not enter into war just because one wants to get some slaves. But if there is a
Here we go. This is where he should have started, in my opinion.
Just war, which is called as a last resort after every diplomatic means fails, called by a legitimate authority to right a wrong or to remove an oppressor or to seek justice, then if as a result of that war, especially when you're being attacked and you're defending your community as Muslims were forced to do, then what was to be done with the captives of war? Today, the captives of war would be put in a prison and then eventually released or exchanged for prisoners. Well, Muslims had these options as well, except that they did not have a prison in the nascent Muslim community. For the first time, Omar bought a house. He was the second.
This is what I like about one aspect of Sharia law that I like is that prisons don't exist. When you look at the West, the amount of men and also women that are in prisons right now as we speak is very high. It's very high. And when you think about it, these people have done something wrong, and we've told them that, okay, you have to go spend time in this cell, and we're going to feed you, and you get showers, and we'll give you some rights, and yeah. So this is a different way than Sharia, where in Sharia law mostly it's based on you pay the price for your wrongdoing in the form of pain, which doesn't take very long, and then you go back to work. You go back to being a productive member of society. And this is sort of reminding me, why I'm mentioning this is what he's saying about the slaves, the prisoners of war. This sort of reminds me of the Sharia law, in that rather than putting people as captives and putting them in a prison and then wasting their life, wasting the resource of this human, we can instead put them to work, given that they are prisoners of war, and that war, the reason that you engage in that war was just in the first place. So I like where Shabir Ali has gone. I feel like he should have started with this, though, because this whole time he's been talking about slaves, but didn't first give the criteria for which Muslims could actually have slaves in the first place.
Caliph of Islam, and he dedicated that house to be a prison for criminals. So seeing that there was no prison, the way of dealing with prisoners of war was to distribute them within the community to serve as household servants. And so this is what we are referring to when we talk about the slavery within that Islamic context. It's not like the plantation slavery that, if you watch a movie like 12 Years a Slave, that's you see the horror of slavery. Well, slavery is bad altogether, but in the Islamic context, it was not exactly the same thing.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir. And we'll pick up on some of the topics again in a future episode, especially we want to talk about concubines.
Sure.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Okay, pretty interesting video there. A few things that stood out to me is when he said, we recognize that slavery is evil. And at the end there, he just said something very similar. Wherein there's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no Quranic way to back this claim up. It's never said that slavery is inherently evil. However, there are quite strict criteria for slavery. And one thing I think he didn't mention was about how slaves, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, encouraged Muslims to treat their slaves well, to give them the clothes that they themselves use, to feed them with the food that they themselves eat, things like this. If you have slaves, treat them very well. And the only way you should have slaves in the first place is if they're prisoners of war, and to and also the reason that you're in that war in the first place should be just, meaning that they should have attacked you first, and you're basically fighting for your survival. Anyway, guys, that was a pretty interesting video. Shabir gave me some good chances to speak there, and also he gave some pretty good information. And hope you guys like that, inshallah. And we will see you guys in the next one, inshallah. Ma salama.